My name is Tom Munson. I'm the archives manager here at the Sioux City Public Museum. And this afternoon, I'm pleased to present to you food manufacturing in Sioux City since 1850. That pretty much encompasses everything since there really wasn't much here before 1850. So, as you know I want to do, I'm going to start at the beginning because that is the best place to start. So, the first food products manufactured in Sioux City, well, it's grain, it's flour milling. And you can see some of the early flour milling done here, grain milling was done by William Thompson, who started a grist mill here in what would become Sioux City in around 1853. So Sioux City didn't officially get its start until the winter of 1854, 1855. And among the first industries here as an official city was that of the Roysch brothers grain mill. They started in 1859. The Sioux City exchange mills started in 1867. Now you can see the illustration of the exchange mills here at the bottom of the screen. The exchange mills stayed in business for quite some time under various different names. The Hedges brothers took over that mill from 1872 to 1884. Then it was operated by Rounds and Martins in the mid-1880s. And then the Martins brothers operated the mill from 1885 to 1915. And finally, as this image depicts, the mill was operated by Martins and Kettles Company from 1915 to 1933. A couple of their products were Splendid flour. Of course, you can see here one of these images in advertisement, and the other image is actually of one of their flour sacks. What's a neat thing about this talk is I get to talk about really a lot of artifacts because food products are packaged, and there's just some great packaging along with this. The Sioux City Mills flour bag you see on the left is interesting because right below the name of the mills, there's a little symbol there that is a Made in Sioux City symbol. Now this became really popular around 1911 and was placed on Sioux City products. So that logo looks a little bit like this, Made in Sioux City. Again, that logo appearing around 1911. The Sioux City Chamber of Commerce and the Industrial Council really advocated this Made in Sioux City bit, and in 1911 they also published a song, A Made in Sioux City. This is a sheet music, this is actually not depicting the music, but advertisements on that piece of sheet music, and you can see a variety of food products and other durable goods that were manufactured here in Sioux City. A lot of these we're going to talk about in just a little bit, including Heidelbrau beer and New Life beer. Boy, I'm attracted to the beer right away. Hanford's, we will talk about all sorts of these a little bit later on. That mill we saw at the very beginning, that exchange mill that turned into Martins and Kettles milling, became Sioux Soya Company in 1944, and they operated that mill until 1959. Now, some of this might start to look just a little bit familiar, and it's so interesting because this mill is still in operation today as Cargill Incorporated, which it has been since 1959. So that original exchange mill in Sioux City that opened in 1867 is still, at least in some form, operational as Cargill Soybean Processing. Keeping in with the milling of grain for flour, downtown at 3rd and Water Street was the City Mill and Elevator Company, which operated from 1870 to 1900. And in 1900, that business was acquired by Mystic Milling. Now, Mystic Milling, we're going to see that name pop up again because they acquired many of Sioux City's milling facilities. Here are some products from the Sioux City Mill Company, including Rose Leaf flour, Art Kraft flour, Red Seal, and White Lily flour. The Sioux City Oatmeal Mill opened in 1887 at the corner of Grand Avenue, which is today Gordon Drive, and Steuben Streets near the South Bottoms. Now this mill operated under a variety of names between 1887 and 1911, including the Sioux City Oatmeal Company, the Sioux Milling Company, and the Great Western Cereal Company. After 1911, the mill was acquired again by Mystic Milling Company, and later International Milling Company, Cereal Milling Company, and this facility operated under those names from 1911 to 1936. Here is one of their flagship brands of international milling. This is the Seal of Minnesota flour. Up in Leeds, the Great Northern Mills, also known as Bonus Milner Mills, opened in 1890. At the time of its opening in that year, this was the second largest mill in the state, grain mill in the state of Iowa. It operated until 1896 under the Bonus Milner name, when it too was acquired by Mystic Milling Company in 1896, which operated it up until 1920, and then International Milling took over from 1920 to 1947, and grain milling ceased at this site in 1947 because the mill burned down. That is a good reason to stop milling. Here you could see in that last slide atop the grain elevator was the name Robin Hood Flour. International Milling, that was one of their brands, including, again, we can see here the Seal of Minnesota flour and Robin Hood flour. This Robin Hood flour sack is in our collection here at the museum. The short-lived Sioux City Starch Works operated in the Floyd River Valley on what is today Hawkeye Drive. It was later acquired by Duryca and Company, and later the National Starch Company. This operation was in business from 1894 until 1903. Many of these buildings that you can see, this is actually, what I have pictured here is actually an ink blotter, and you can see some of the buildings there are still standing on Hawkeye Drive. In downtown, the Akron Milling Company built this mill in 1907 and operated it until 1929. Akron Milling Company, as you may guess, started in Akron, Iowa in 1902, but opened this facility in Sioux City in 1907. One of their flagship brands is advertised on the side of the mill, and it's their Peerless Pancake flour. This was at the corner of 2nd and Pearl Street. Grain merchant John Mullaney, who had been in business here in Sioux City since the early part of the 20th century, purchased that Akron Milling Company mill and operated as his own flour mill, grain mill, from 1929 to 1955. Very much in keeping with the grain milling and flour are bakeries. They're kind of kindred industries. So Sioux City's earliest bakeries include that of Augustus Klindolf, Odilon Lamore, both starting in 1857, Gravel and Brunette starting in 1858, and John Scheibel in 1860. And on the other bottom of the screen here on the right, you can see an advertisement for Metz Baking Company, which started in 1892, but it was a descendant of Henry Fashman's Northwestern Bakery, which had started in 1871. Of course, this iteration of Metz Baking was around until 1921. We'll get to that in just a little bit. A second bakery, a large-scale bakery, was the Sioux City Cracker and Candy Company, which opened at 309-311 Douglas Street in 1887. That business was bought by the American Biscuit Manufacturing Company and operated as a Sioux City factory from 1890 to 1898. The crate you can see there in the lower left depicts oyster crackers from in an advertisement for the American Biscuit Manufacturing Company. That business, in turn, was purchased by the National Biscuit Company and Sioux City division. It operated that way from 1898 to 1907. The next slide just features some of their small advertising cards from the American Biscuit Manufacturing Company. This is that one that existed from 1890 to 1898. Puppies and little girls and birds. Why not? If it sells your baked goods, then that's great. Now, the Biscuit Company, the one that operated from 1898 to 1907, was acquired by local wholesale grocer Tollerton Warfield in 1907 and reorganized into the Johnson Biscuit Company. So the Johnson Biscuit Company was a descendant of that Sioux City Cracker Company that opened in 1887. This is the Johnson Biscuit Company bakery at the corner of Fifth and Floyd. They had numerous products, whipped cream chocolates, oyster crackers, Johnson chocolates, La Fama chocolates, Oriental chocolates, and cafe soda crackers. You can all see here on this slide. Again, many of these boxes are in the collection of the Sioux City Public Museum. Johnson Biscuit still has a legacy in Sioux City today. In 1969, their name was changed to Interbake Foods, which is today Weston Foods, operating in North Sioux City, South Dakota. Going back a few years, Lindsay's Parisian Cone Manufacturing Company, 1909 to 1915. The Sioux City Bakery, located on West 7th Street, was in operation from 1911 to 1983, and their flagship brand, Goody Bread, which you can see there on the sides of those delivery trucks. Also on West 7th was the Iowa Bakery, which was around from 1913 to around 1963. This is an image from the 1940s, and you can see here their branded bread was Splendid. I don't believe there's any association between this Splendid bread and the Splendid flour, which we saw earlier in this presentation. The Campbell Baking Company opened this bakery at 9th and Grandview Boulevard in 1919. They operated until 1934, when it was taken over by Continental Baking Company, which operated this bakery from 1934 to 1985. Some of you might remember this just a little bit better. Continental Baking were the makers of Wonder Bread here in Sioux City. From the 1920s to the 1940s, this Continental Baking Company was the largest bakery in the state of Iowa. And you can see there Wonder Bread, and their another brand was Home Pride Bread. And of course, on the bottom of the screen, you can see Continental Baking, or the Wonder Bread Bakery, as I remember it as a child. Metz Baking Company reappears. So Henry Metz Sr. sold his bakery to Continental to Campbell Baking in 1921. His sons reopened a new Metz Baking Company in 1922, and this bakery, as depicted here, was in the 400 block of Pearl Street. It would later, in the late 1940s, move to its location on Highway 75, where it operated until 2000. Speaking of that new bakery on Highway 75, here it is. Metz Baking was acquired by Earth Grains. Earth Grains was acquired by Sara Lee, and Sara Lee was acquired by Bimbo Bakeries, and those companies used this facility from 2000 until its final closure in 2014. Now, there was a Metz and Bimbo Bakery in South Sioux, which I was not sure of before this presentation today. I looked, and that bakery, too, closed in 2019. So, the major brand from Metz Baking was Old Home Bread. Here you can see on the right an employee emptying dough from a mixer, and on the bottom, loaves of bread awaiting packaging. This is a photo from 1997 showing a delivery truck full of Old Home Bread. I always feel guilty when I miss something. Somebody says, why didn't you mention this? Well, here are bakeries I did not mention. There's several dozen. If you think this slide is bad, wait until you see some of the lists I have later on in the talk. Going to one of my favorite subjects, breweries. So it's not all food products. I mean, beer is kind of a food product, but debate all you like. Rudolph Seltzer opened Sioux City's first brewery in 1860 and operated it until Iowa's prohibition laws finally put him out of business in 1887. This brewery was located at the corner of 9th and Douglas Streets. John Schlawig opened the Union Brewery at 5th and Jones Streets in 1867, and it was around for about 9 years until 1876. Jacob Franz and Company opened the first Sioux City brewery at the corner of West 3rd and Kansas Streets in 1868, and much like Seltzer, they were in business until Prohibition finally put them out of business. This is a neat piece in our collection. This is a Jacob Franz stoneware bottle from around 1880. And of course, on the left side, you can see Franz Brewing Company ad for the Sioux City Brewery, brewers of lager beer. After Iowa repealed Prohibition, new breweries began to open in Sioux City, including this second Sioux City Brewing Company, which was around from 1899 to 1916, when, again, Iowa passed Prohibition into law in 1916. Here you can see a label for Sioux City Bavarian Export and DeLong's Malt, which was manufactured by the Sioux City Brewing Company, especially for a local wholesaler here, Hornick, Hess, and more. This brewery sat where just south of today's Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. One of the Sioux City Brewing Company's flagship brands was Western Brew, which was introduced in 1904. Their second major brand was Heidelbrau beer, which was introduced for the first time in 1911. In 1908, the Sioux City Brewing Company opened here in Sioux City at the corner of West 1st and Isabella. That is today Hamilton and West 1st, and much of this brewery is still standing today. Here, their two major brands were New Tonic and New Life. Here you can see an ad from 1913 for New Tonic and a label from a New Life bottle about that same era. The third iteration of Sioux City Brewing Company came about in 1934 when, once again, national prohibition was repealed and we could again have our beer. So this Sioux City Brewing Company, located in the former Interstate Brewery, opened in 1934 and operated until 1958, when it was taken over by Kingsbury Brewing, which was later taken over by Heilman Brewing and then closed for good in 1961. Luckily, today we have a few modern breweries. 4th Street Brewing Company opened in 1998, but was a little bit ahead of its time as far as the craft brewing movement was concerned, and they closed in 2002. Today, however, we have Mardo Brewing, Jackson Street Brewing, and Brew City all opening within the last 8 years. Packing houses. Now this is a part of this talk that is deserving of its own talk, so I won't go into great depth on this, but of course, packing plants produced a number of edible products, everything from sausage, bacon, ham, lard, and a lot of the packing plants were also processing chickens and had their produce companies, so they were candling eggs and selling that kind of produce as well. Sioux City's pioneer meat packer was James Bogue, who started packing in earnest here in Sioux City in 1866. And he did so until 1891. What you see pictured here was his meatpacking plant, which he operated from 1881 until 1891. This plant was later taken over by the Sioux City Packing Company for a few years, and eventually the North American Beef Company in 1900, before this structure was raised in the early part of the 20th century. Other major meatpacking concerns include Silberhorn Packing, which opened in 1887, operated here for a while, became International Packing, and eventually would become home to Armour & Company from 1901 to 1963. One of the others of the big three meatpacking plants was Cudahy, but it started out as the Robert Fowler Packing Company in 1888, became Hawkinson, and Sioux City Dressed Beef and Canning for a brief era in the late 1880s and early 1890s, finally becoming Cudahy Packing in 1892, and this was Sioux City's largest employer up until 1954. We got a neat collection of slides, of advertising slides of Cudahy's. So here are some of their main brands. We have beef and gravy, we have Vienna sausages, tamales, ham, their butter and lard products, Clicks and Delrich. There were other smaller meat packers as well, including Adolf Heller and Sons, which was the manufacturer of sausage and minced meat. This facility would later become Sterling Packing, then Weber Poultry Company, and finally Sunlight Produce, which was a division of Cudahy Packing, and it operated that way from 1917 to 1946. This is an advertisement for Sterling Packing Company. It's a little difficult to see on the slide, but that barrel on the left-hand side of the screen is, I believe, I'm pretty sure I got to look. I think it's pickled pig's feet. It is pickled pig's feet. And of course, you can see advertisements for Blue Ribbon brand hams and bacon. The Herney Packing Company was operated by Rudolph Herney from 1894 to 1917. Smith Brothers Packing Company had a slaughterhouse in the stockyards and a packing and manufacturing division here in downtown on 3rd Street between Floyd and Iowa Streets. They were in operation from 1913 to 1959. Midland Packing had a very short period of operation in 1920, and that facility was purchased by Swift Packing, a national packer, in 1924, and they operated this facility up until 1975. And of course, one of the largest meat processing businesses in the United States is IO Beef Processors, today Tyson IBP, which began in 1960, opened their Dakota City, Nebraska plant in 1965, and of course, IBP is responsible for the revolution in boxed beef, which you can see that picture of the box here of ground beef. It made it a lot easier to ship on railroads and in trucks. Next up is candy. Some of the first candy manufactured here in Sioux City was by David Hughes in May of 1869. You can see a couple other businesses there. S.M. Lamson starting sometime before 1871. J.H. Griffith sometime before 1875. Conrad Schenkberg started manufacturing candy in 1885. And we've already seen the Sioux City Cracker and Candy Company. Well, in addition to their bakery, they made candy starting in about 1887. So we'll start with Conrad Schenkberg. Conrad Schenkberg was a wholesale grocery company. He started here in Sioux City in 1882 and was around until 1916. And as best as I can figure, his business started manufacturing candy in 1885. You can see here a couple brands. You have Schenkberg's Alphorn chocolates, Schenkberg's Vassar chocolates, and at the bottom is Schenkberg's Marshmallows. Again, many of these pieces are part of the museum's collection here. A rather dingy looking room. This was Conrad Schenkberg's candy manufacturing room. I'm sure the candy was delicious though. Conrad Schenkberg, wholesale grocer, became Moore Schenkberg from 1916 to 1920, and O.J. Moore Grocer Company from 1920 to 1935. They continued with Schenkberg's tradition of candy making. You can see the barrel over there, or the pale fine candies, and Moore's whipped cream chocolates. Smith & Elder opened their business in 1887 in the 300 block of Pearl Street. You can see that there on the left-hand side of the screen, Smith & Elder Candy. Smith & Elder were acquired by the became the Iowa Candy Company in 1890, and they operated up until 1900. A.R. Johnson made candy at this location. I believe this is in the 500 block of Court Street. My memory is failing me just a little bit, but they were around for quite some time too, from 1892 to 1921. A name that is very familiar to a lot of us, Palmer & Company, which started as a wholesale grocery company that started in 1893 and lasted up until 1914. They started manufacturing candy around 1898. And of course, Palmer & Company split into two different businesses, one of them being Palmer Candy Company, which has existed since 1914 and is still around today. Of course, they made myriad candy products. maraschino cherries, marshmallows, Miss Brown chocolates, Whorehound. I remember the first time I saw this, I didn't know what Whorehound was, and then one of my volunteers got us Whorehound, and now I know what Whorehound candy is. And of course, the big name we know from Palmer's is Twin Bing. Palmer Candy initiated this product in 1923. It is very close coming up to its 100th anniversary, isn't it? Seemed like the 75th anniversary was, just like 24 years ago. This is manufacturing of Twin Bings. This photo from 1997. It looks rather unappetizing, but I know by experience that it is delicious. The Sioux Candy Company also made candy here in Sioux City from 1919 to 1932. Oh, they had some great advertising. I love the name, their Paradise Bar. And of course here we can see an advertisement just for regular chocolates from the Sioux Candy Company. And this great little metal container, which is about the size of a small book. Surprise package. Davidson Brothers Company, T.S. Martin and Yonkers, all big department stores here in Sioux City. Of course, they had their own candy-making divisions. You can see on the top there, Davidson's below, Yonker Davidson's. And a little personal touch to this talk. This is my great-grandmother, Lily Munson, who made candy at T.S. Martin and later Yonkers. So that's my little bit of personal connection in this talk. Anna Claire's, of course, are one of the big brands from Yonker Davidson's and Martin's. In Morningside, Dorr Candies opened in 1946. That became Jarvis Candies in 1960, and they were around up until 1981. Candyland Incorporated started in 1947 and was purchased by Kraft Foods and became a Marshmallow division in 1955, and they were here until 1963. You can see the Candyland Marshmallow ad across the top of the screen. And the young woman down below, this is a George Newman photograph negative. Newman was a Sioux City Journal photographer, and she is holding a couple of Sioux City made products, including a Candyland candy package. And the other one is, the bottle she's holding is Nesbitt's Cola, and we'll get to that a little bit later on when we get to soft drinks. Oh, the other candy makers. Just a couple, right? There have been a lot of candy makers in Sioux City's history. Dairies and Creameries. Dairy and creameries were a huge industry here in Sioux City. We had some major national outlets that had facilities here, but that tradition of dairies and creameries in Sioux City begins back in 1869. Edward Todd, Theophily Heggie, Edward Vivers, and Edward Fisher all starting dairy operations here between 1869 and 1883. The photo you see here is the dairy of A.S. Hanford. Now, A.S. Hanford will become a big deal. This is an early photo of his from about 1888. Started in 1888, Hanford Produce was around until 1937. In 1937, it became Pilly & Sons, and that business was around until 1962. Hanford Produce was the largest single-site creamery in the United States through the 1890s all the way up until the late 1920s. The photo you see here is their dairy operation, some of which is still standing near the intersection of First and Court Streets. Actually, between Virginia and Court Street. Below you can see a couple of the products. You can see some Pilly's ice cream and a Pilly bottle, as well as Hanford's block of butter. Here, this is a postcard depicting the butter churn room of Hanford's Creamery. Various iterations of the Hutchinson Company, F.D. Hutchinson, Hutchinson Brothers, and Hutchinson Purity Ice Cream, and Hutchinson Creamery Company, all operated out of this facility from 1892 to 1926. What's fascinating about this building is we've seen this building earlier. This was the beer lagering room from Franz's Brewery, dating way back into the 1860s. This is on the north side of West 4th Street, just along Perry Creek. Young's Dairy had a couple of different incarnations. E.D. Young started dairy in 1898 and operated until 1916. His son, George Young, would start up the same business in 1924, and it operated until 1964. Here's the bottling line of Young's around 1960. A couple of smaller dairies with short lives include the Glendale Dairy Company at 610 Pearl Street. They were around from 1906 to 1914. The Blue Valley Creamery Company was around for a substantially longer time, 1907 to 1939. This was in the 200 block of Pearl Street. And there is an advertisement, a big old block of Blue Valley butter for you. Soderstrom Dairy on the city's north side started in 1907 and operated until 1951. Arctic Creamery Company, downtown, was around from 1909 to 1920 in the 600 block of Nebraska Street. And there is their Polar Maid ice cream and a milk bottle there on the left side of the screen. Roberts Dairy opened an operation in Sioux City in 1918, and they ended up closing around 1993. This was not their only facility. This building was on Douglas Street, and they would move to a new facility, which you can see here in 1933. And of course, Roberts was well known for milk, and you can see the glass milk bottle on the far side, and then the various cardboard cartons on the bottom of the screen there. This is the bottling line at Roberts in that facility that we just saw. This photo, again, around 1960. Fairmont Creamery Company, located at near today's intersection of Wesley Way and 3rd Street. Fairmont was based in Nebraska, but they opened their largest dairy processing center here in Sioux City in 1919, and it was around until 1965. A couple of Fairmont products, some ice cream, a milk bottle, and on the left you can see a variety of things like eggs and milk and ice cream and probably cottage cheese and just about anything that you can make from milk and cream. Swift & Company, which we knew as a meat packer and saw as a meat packer, opened their own produce division, so processing chickens and bottling milk and making butter, opened this facility in 1926. Equity Union Creameries Incorporated on 6th Street was around from 1929 to 1952. Woolies Dairy, which had stores called Woolies Bungalow Ice Cream, was around from 1929 to 1943. Here we can see a handful of their products, including an ice cream container, a cottage cheese container, and a cop top milk bottle. Kegley Creamery Company Incorporated, that's an awful lot of K sounds, was around from 1933 to 1946. You can just vaguely see their sign there on the far right side of the screen on Water Street. Rowe Dairy, which is a very familiar name to many Sioux Cityans, they acquired Woolies. Rowe Dairy was around from 1942 to 1977. And I hear very often that so many people say, I lived by the Rowe Dairy. Well, I'm sure you did because they had 12 locations. So you were not alone if you lived by a Rowe Dairy or had one on your walk to or from school. They were everywhere. The one depicted here is on Morningside Avenue near Lakeport Avenue. It's today Sunkist Bakery. Oh yeah. And the other dairies and creameries I didn't mention Again, they were also all over the place, and they were numerous. Back to more beverages. Bottling in Sioux City. So this is going to be things like soft drinks and ginger ale. Started with Anthony Jackson in 1871 and Thomas Smith in that same year. The bottle depicted here is that of S.H. Dillon, who operated the Sioux City Bottling Works from 1881 to 1902. Now they bottled things like soda and seltzer water, ginger ale, and cider. The Chestermans came to Sioux City in 1885 and partnered with Fred Barrow. Chesterman and Barrow in operation here from 85 to 1889, which the partnership became Chesterman Lane after that in 1891, and finally just Chesterman Company in 1901, and they are still extant today. On the left side of the screen, you can see one of their early bottles, and you can see their delivery wagon here at their factory, which used to be at about West 15th and Omaha Streets. Chesterman moved up to Bluff Street, and you can see that factory here on the left-hand side of your screen. In the early part of the 20th century, Chesterman started bottling Coca-Cola. That was a pretty big deal for them. You can also see some of their other beverages, though, including Hawkeye Water, Suncrest Beverages, Hawkeye Distilled Water, and Hawkeye Temperance Drinks. Lane Bottling. We saw Lane in associated with Chesterman. Well, they split up in 1899, but Fred Lane started his own bottling company in 1900 on the west side. Here are just a couple of bottles of theirs. You have grape, cream soda, cherry, and orange. Lane Bottling was around until 1983. The Sioux City Bottling Works, a second Sioux City Bottling Works, not S.H. Dillon's Bottling Works, but a second one popped up in 1917 and was around until 1968. And you can see that they had numerous products, including Sicko Club, 3V, King's Court, Clico Club, Hires, High Rock, and Dr. Pepper. You can also see they made High Rock distilled water as well. Knee-High Bottling Company of Sioux City was around from 1931 to 1948. It was operated by a guy named Harold Hathaway. It became Hathaway Beverages in 1948 and was that until 1951. You can see the various Knee-High bottles, Upper 10, Hathaway's, and Mason's Root Beer. Pepsi-Cola started bottling in Sioux City in 1939. That's also a Hart Beverage Company. They used to be on the west side until the later part of the 20th century, moving to South Sioux City. We saw that ad with that young woman holding the Candyland chocolates and Nesbitt Bottling. Well, here's a Nesbitt bottle. They were around for a very short time, located on Lakeport Avenue. Both Nesbitt and Grapette Bottling Company existed here from 1950 to 1952. We, in the museum, have a couple of Rio Products Company bottles. The bottles are all different shapes, but they all have the same label, but I cannot find anything about them. I never have, and I'm not sure if I ever will. In probably 10 years of looking to find out information on Rio products, have still found nothing. But other beverages and bottlers, you can see there were quite a handful of them as well. Some oddball things. Vinegar and Pickling Works. The Sioux City Vinegar and Pickling Works was in downtown starting in 1884. In the 1890s, they moved to Riverside. You can see both of their facilities here. They were later in operation by Frederick Friede from 1907 to 1909. And finally, Harmon Vinegar and Pickling Works from 1909 to 1916. In the center, you can see a Harmon ketchup bottle. They also made mustard, ketchup, and horseradish. Speaking of horseradish, the Sioux Brewing Company, later the Sioux Manufacturing Company, made vinegar, bluing, ammonia, potato chips, and horseradish from 1900 to 1928. This company was operated by Mrs. Percy. Therefore, that is Mrs. Percy's Pure Horseradish. That's a bottle also in the museum's collection. Coffees, spices, and extracts. I'm going to try to make what's coming up as simple as I can. The Northwestern spice mills were started by M. Standish in 1885. You can see a handful of other spice companies, Hurd and Wing, Charles Brune, which started in 1871, started making coffee around 1890, and Conrad Schenkberg, which started in 1882. They also started roasting their own coffee beans around 1890. What you see here depicted is Schenkberg's warehouse at the corner of 3rd and Pierce Streets. Charles Brune, who had been in the grocery business in Sioux City since 1871, started making coffee, as I mentioned, around 1890. We can see Brune's grocery store there on the left and a tin of Brune's pure coffee, probably from around 1910. Conrad Schenkberg, again, we've already seen Schenkberg's name, around from 82 to 1916, started making coffee around 1890. We can see on the far side a crate from the Conrad Schenkberg Company. We see on the bottom honeymoon breakfast coffee, Saturday evening host coffee, and in the center, I believe, is a flavor extract produced by Conrad Schenkberg Company. Their business was phenomenal. Again, Morin Schenkberg, which was the successor to Conrad Schenkberg, also continued roasting coffee and making candy and all the kinds of things that they did. Morin Schenkberg, we can see again, they kept up with the Honeymoon brand. They also introduced Safety Box brand coffee, and you can see this crate here on the bottom, manufacturers, grocers, and coffee roasters. That's from both Morin Schenkberg and O.J. Moore Company. They also produced things like pancake flour and made their own rolled oats breakfast food. William Tackaberry was another wholesale grocer, but they also manufactured foods and roasted their own coffee, including the Tack Cut brand coffee, which you can see there on the left, and up top, they packaged olives. You have Tackaberry's green olives. Tackaberry's warehouse and manufacturing facilities were located at 3rd and Floyd Boulevard. The building is still there today. The big Tollerton and Stetson mess. So, more wholesale grocers. Tollerton and Stetson Company started in Sioux City in 1885. It became Tollerton Warfield, and simultaneously there's another wholesale grocery company, Warfield Pratt Howell, around since 1898, which became Pratt Mallory. They all produced their own food products. Here we can see a variety of Tollerton Warfield and Warfield Pratt and Howell and Pratt Mallory coffees. Tollerton Warfield not only made coffee, but made cornflakes, had their own rolled oats, made white syrup. They had their own candy brand. You can see Quail brand confections. You can see extract of lemon and dandelion extract. Many of these were under the Superb name or the Quail name. And one other brand was First Prize. Here we can see an advertisement for the Tollerton Warfield Company, which manufactured these products. But you can also see, if you can see some of these product names, a lot of them are reading Rob Ross. Well, what the devil is Rob Ross? Rob Ross is a food manufacturing company that was organized by Tollerton and Warfield exclusively for manufacturing food products. Rob Ross was around from 1920 to 1974. This is in the former William Tackaberry Wholesale Grocery Company. So again, this building is still standing at the corner of 3rd and Floyd Boulevard. What did they make? Well, just a little bit of everything. We have syrup, peanut butter, food coloring, and other extracts like, you can see, I just love the designs on those peanut butter tins. They packaged cider vinegar. This was the advertisement for this program. So these are women packing or bottling vinegar for Rob Ross. Here we can see the packing of pancake flour for Rob Ross. Cohen Wholesale Grocery would take over the former Conrad Schenkberg and O.J. Moore, and they would continue with the brand, including 3-Star, but they 3-Star rolled oats. So we've seen rolled oats before. We also get Kutsher's Coffee and Kutsher's rolled oats. Kutsher was involved with the Cohen Wholesale Grocery Company, which was around from 1930 to 1957. The Hearst Coffee, Tea, and Spice Company was around from 1938 to 46. It was purchased by Bovis Coffee Company and was operated as that from 1946 to 1972. Coffee bean roasting is something that's still done in Sioux City today. I will feel terrible if I missed somebody, but I think I got most of the major ones. Modern coffee roasters, including Coffee King Incorporated, which started in 1981. Jumping Monkey started in 1999. Stone Brew, which started in 2015 and is in the process of opening a new coffee roasting building. And Hardline Coffee, which is one of our downtown neighbors that started in 2018. We're getting very near the end. Honey, Sioux City's first bee tender listed in the Sioux City directories was H.G. Osmond in 1892. There you can see his hives in some small buildings there. Sioux City Western honey producers would open in 1907 and continue until 1928. And you can see their 3 Bees brand. Now, many of the executives and officers of this Western Honey Producers Company in 1921 also started the Sioux Honey Association, which exists today most notably as Sioux Bee Honey. Here we can see the continuation of the 3 Bees brand. So this is very familiar. Sioux City as a honey producing center. Here is the honey packaging line. This photo, I think, is a lot of these that I've shown of recent manufacturers. This was taken around 1997. Ooh, the newest addition to this talk, which I just put in yesterday. In South Sioux City, the Sioux Beet Syrup and Preserving Company made sugar syrup from sugar beets. They were around from 1901 to 1904. Not a very long life. That facility was taken over by the Crystal Lake Distilling Company, makers of whiskey, and they were in South Sioux from 1907 to 1913. The Grain Belt Cereal Company had a short life here in Sioux City from 1921 to sometime before 1924. And there is their brand, Kernels of Wheat. And lastly, the American Popcorn Company started in 1914, still operating to present. You can see the large popcorn bag there in the corner. The Jolly Time, their flagship brand, you can see that production line here. And finally, from old to new, some old 1930s popcorn box, a new Blasto butter box, and an image from Jolly Time showing many of their products from their over 100-year history. And that is just a little bit about food manufacturing in Sioux City. I want to thank you so much for coming today, putting up with me. I hope you learned something. I hope you still like me. So thank you very much.